Well, you're very, very welcome to our last show on the history of South Armagh by the Shanagee Una Welsh. It's going to be another cracking show. There's lovely videos and lovely music, and of course, Una's going to take us round South Armagh for one last trip this evening here. But we think maybe we will go back and do something later on when the dark nights come in again. I think, Una, what you have
Yeah.
done over this last 5 weeks, you have educated us. You have made me look at South Armagh a whole different way. I was up the Burnish yesterday, take the dog for a walk, and there was this car come down and they were turning and they looked lost and they were saying, "Is there anywhere I can go for a picnic?" And I says, "Well, you can go down to the viewpoint there." But says, "No, no, we had one up at the big rock." I goes, the Dillman, yes. So I started telling them about the history of the mountain, and they're going around the oldest mountain in Ireland. And they were
You're
looking
mad,
at
isn't
me.
it?
They were looking at me, and I'm going, but this is true. This is absolutely true. And then it says you should go over to Killeavy Old Churches as well. So they're from Armagh. So there you go. That's the sort of stuff that I've been looking at this, and I've been saying to myself, from my point of view, this has been a fantastic experience. It has been brilliant for Destination Uri to have this platform with yourself and to be partners in this, to be able to explain to people. And I know from the feedback that I've been getting and Destination Uri has been getting over this last while, this has been an absolute massive success. And again, I was looking at the papers at the weekend, and they were saying to go here and go there for holidays and stay. Not a mention of this place. So, I'm hoping that what we have done here is we have opened the eyes of people, and we've lit a little flame, and now that flame starts to get hot and it'll glow. And I don't want to be taking any more time up here because, again, you have another cracking show here. So I'm going to let you take it from here, Una, and I'll come in the odd time and ask you a few questions, and
Right.
just let's enjoy this last program.
Okay. Thanks, Damien. Yeah, well, I suppose, Damien talked about it's been an education. I hope, as well as maybe an education, I hope it's been enjoyable, because that's one of the things about history, is that the enjoyment sort of went out of history when it became such an academic or in the hands of academia. So for me, history is about stories. And it's where South Armagh absolutely and totally excels. And tonight, maybe that's what we're going to look about is the greatest asset to South Armagh. I mean, we have the geology, we have the archaeology, and we have all of that is a constant. But our greatest, I think, treasure are our people. The caliber of the people who have been here down through the years and continue to be here. So that's some of the things we're going to look at. But we're going to open the show tonight with our young people. And this is the under 12. Now, I'll say it again just to reinforce it. These children are under 12. This is the under 12 Traditional Arts Partnership. Okay, Cahill. I mean, when you can show a video of a group of youngsters that are under 12 years of age and they can do that, I mean, that's absolute magic. My mother, as they would say in South Armagh, could have danced on a sixpence. She was a terrific dancer. I grew up with stories of the crossroad dances and her talking about dancing all night at the crossroad at the bottom of the house in Dorsey where she was living, and changing her clothes and going to work. But the music now that's alive in South Armagh is of a calibre that you're not going to find in other places, and that's thanks to the Traditional Arts Partnership. So looking at the constant feature of South Armagh being Slieve Gullion, and the people that carried the stories at Slieve Gullion, and we talked about the Pavies, and the Pavies has been a great story because a load of people have come back to me asking about the Pavies and the fact that it was in that small part of South Armagh, and it's such a story. And the old goats that linked South Armagh with Mulranny in County Mayo, where the Pavy men went to get the goats, and the fact that they then took the goats to England. So I've been talking yesterday with the school here and with the Old Goat Society in Mulranny, and we're looking at a heritage next year of how we do this walk of the Pavies. So it has been a really, really interesting story to work on. But the constant, I suppose, the man for that area is Michael J. The mountain is Slieve Gullion. The mystic mountain that Maud Gawn wrote to Michael J. and said she came to Slieve Gullion and the mountain sang to her and she could almost write down the air. So the myth of Slieve Gullion has travelled not only the length of Ireland, but of the world. So I want to pay tribute to Michael J. first of all tonight. And to say that anyone that's interested in the writing of Michael J. Murphy, his first book was At Slieve Gullion's Foot, was published in 1941. And we owe a debt of gratitude as well to Tempest in Dundalk, because Tempest in Dundalk were the group that were willing to publish and do a lot of work with local history. But Michael J.'s book At Slieve Gullion's Foot was reprinted in 2013. For the 100th anniversary of his birth, and there are copies of that available in Cullen. Anyone that's interested, and really it is so worth your while to get a copy of that book, to look at the things that in 1941, Michael J. Murphy was talking in 1941 about the strength of the link between the people and the earth, and the need to preserve the earth. Stuff that is now being talked about in terms of climate change and all of the things we need to do, and how being in contact with the turning of the earth helps your well-being. All of the stuff that now is becoming a major part of what you read. Michael J. Murphy was putting that out in the 1940s. He was massively ahead of his time in his writing, but also in his preservation of the folklore, of the speech pattern of this area. So the next clip we're going to do is Colleen Savage and Padraig Carrer, and they are singing a song written by John Spillane, and anyone that's into music will have heard of John Spillane, the Cork songwriter and singer, and he has written this song about Slieve Gullion. So it has been sung by Colleen and Padraig, two of the South Armagh ambassadors.
gathered in bloom. Oh, all around the mountain and all the way home. Slave Gallion, she wears a white crown. There's snow in her bosom of white eider down. Her holly and her ivy, her brakes and her boughs, and here and there on the mountain the gorse is in flower. Oh, all around the mountain and all around the mountain and all around the mountain and all the way home.
So that was Colleen and Padraig. Now, Colleen is a singer-songwriter, and Padraig, the two of them were sitting in the field at Bluebell Glamping, and that's owned by Padraig and his wife Sharon. And when you're looking at staycation, absolutely sitting on the Slave Gullion, it's a beautiful, beautiful place. So come up and have a look at it. So I'm going to, sorry.
I was looking behind me there. I have the book at the foot of Slave Gullion, and I thought I had it up here with the books, but it's not. It's up my mother's because I was looking at it at the weekend there, and I thought I had it there, so I was trying to look around to see could I find it, and I have that book, believe it or not, and it is very, very good, And I suppose when you look at the young ones, all them youngsters under 12 playing that music, and enjoying it. And you can see the enjoyment in the way they're playing it. And then you come and you see the two playing there, sitting in Slave Gullion, and it's just, it's magical,
It's, and I suppose it's the naturalness of it. There's no effort involved in this. And I suppose that's when you know that something is working for somebody, is their absolute sense of enjoyment. And you can see that enjoyment. And it's when you read Michael J. Murphy's book, the words, as you're reading the words, you can get a sense of his sense of place, of his love of the place that he's talking about. You can feel that as you're reading it. And I suppose that's what makes everything real, is that feeling.
There's no doubt about it. And of course, when we talk about Slave Gullion and we talk about the beauty about the place, we've captured people's imagination. We have Sheila Johnson from Connecticut, USA, watching here now, sending us greetings from over there. And it's great, Sheila, that you're looking at this and enjoying it. And of course, there has to be a connection with the name Johnson. I wonder anything of Johnson of the Fuse.
Or the Johnsons of Carrickbroad, the Johnsons of Carrickbroad as well, going back. But it's, so what we're going to do now is we're going to move around to two places that we talked about in the context of Bessbrook that first night. And we talked about the population of Bessbrook being 3,500. And at the time that it was 3,500 in Bessbrook in 1888, it was 898 in Newtownhamilton. So just to look at that Newtownhamilton area for a minute and look at, because we hadn't talked about it in any sort of detail. Newtownhamilton is exactly what it says on the tin. It's the new town of Hamiltons. Hamiltons were the landlords. And Hamiltons as a landlord body came to that area in about 1770 and started the town of Newtownhamilton. Now, there had been two earlier attempts made to create a settlement in that area at the time of the plantation of Ulster, 1609. The first barracks that was created was out on Black Bank. Anyone that's going the road to Armagh will know that area is called Black Bank. And there's snow on Black Bank when there's snow nowhere. It's one of the coldest places in Ireland. There's a story told of a woman that was going to marry into the Newtownhamilton area. She was from Kilkeel, she told me. And they were to get married, herself and her husband Jim were to marry in 1963. Now, 1963 was a big snow for drifts and drifts of snow for several weeks. And when she went into work, she was working in a builder's yard in Warrenpoint. And when she went in on the Monday, it had been on the news that there was a bus lost on Blackbank and had to be dug out. And she said the men said to her that morning when she went in on the Monday morning, God bless you, don't you begin up now around Newtown. They lose buses. It's that bad up around Newtown. But she came to Newtown anyway and spent her life in Newtown. But that area is Blackbank. So the first attempt to create a settlement was at the top of Blackbank when they set up an army barracks. And they thought that if the barracks was there and the services that were needed to look at the barracks, that the town would grow around it. But it didn't happen. The next attempt was the other side, the top South Armagh side of Newtownhamilton, out at Camley Ball, which is just along that main Armagh to Dundalk Road. And that didn't work either. So those two barrack sites were abandoned. And in 1770, the Hamilton family came to Newtownhamilton and started the settlement that grew into that town. Now, Newtown we talked about the Pabbies and Drummond. The history of Newtown is the history of the hiring fair. The only place there was a hiring fair in South Armagh. Now, if you think now that people as young as 12-year-old were hired. I used to go to an old man on my Cayley to swap stories, to listen to stories. And he was hired for his first outside work was when he was 8-year-old. He was out snigging turnips at 8-year-old. But he was hired for the first time at 12. And he was hired out of South Armagh to a house in Antrim. And he said he was badly treated. Now, he knew as an old man, looking back, that it was less about his treatment than about being homesick. But 3 weeks into his hiring, you hired for 6 months. The hiring fair was the last Saturday of May and the last Saturday of November. So you hired for 6 months. You got whoever was sponsoring you, your parents got a small amount at the beginning of your hiring, and the rest of it came when you were completed. So there was very little money exchanged hands at the start. But he ran away 3 weeks into his hiring, and he told me that he made it into Belfast. He had no idea how he was going to get home. He made it into Belfast, and in the middle of the night, he was walking around Belfast, a 12-year-old lad from the mountain in South Armagh. And a police sergeant came on him, and he asked him what he was doing or where he was going. And he told him his story, and he said he was badly treated and he wanted home. He took him to the police station, and he gave him a bed in a cell in the police station for the night. And the next morning, he said he gave him 2 shillings, and he pointed him on the road that would take him to South Armagh. And he walked for 3 days and 3 nights to make it home. And he was home, and he said to me, as an old man, with absolutely no disrespect to his mother, he said he was neither needed nor wanted, because he had broken his bond, he wouldn't be paid, and he couldn't hire again for 5 months, and his money was needed to keep the house. And that was the reality of life. Now, if you look at how our young people are treated now, and to think that a 12-year-old child, that was the life that there had to be, and they could do nothing else. They could do nothing else. Only live through that. So Newtownhamilton, the only place that had a hiring fair. The next hiring fair was Newry, and a good part of South Armagh would have went to the Newry area to hire. Now, there were some good stories of the hiring, and there were some very bad stories of the hiring, and stories that never were told, that were closed down because people just didn't want to go there. So we owe a debt of gratitude, the people we are now, and especially our children and grandchildren, for the world that those people created for them. That's not something that we have to do now. It's not something I knew. My mother was at the very end of the hiring, so she was never hired out of South Armagh. She was in service, if you like, within South Armagh, but never outside of it. So, you know, those are the stories that young people need to know. They need to know what that generation of people did for them.
And Una, when you think back, it's not that awful far back in history,
No.
you know. And I mean, it's when I mean, I'm sitting here thinking a 12-year-old child taken from Newtown away up to Antrim somewhere to work on a farm for the whole 5 or 6 months.
Yeah.
It doesn't bear thinking about. And I can rest assured that there was probably some horrendous places some of them went to.
Yeah.
Just thinking about a 12-year-old child being taken away and the parents having to let their child go to survive. Again, you know,
there was no other life. There was no other life.
Yeah.
And I think the importance then of, I'll finish the Newtown story and then I'll tell you that other one. So the Hamilton family, the big name in Newtownhamilton, the same name the Hamiltons born. That's the same family of Hamiltons. But one of the Hamiltons, the Hamilton family intermarried with the Singhs. J.M. Singh, playboy of the Western world. But one of the Hamiltons was a minister, Church of Ireland minister, and he had gone to the Aran Islands at one time to apostolatize, to bring them into the Church of Ireland faith. But the first thing he wanted to do when he was there on the islands was to stop any entertainment or anything happening on a Sunday, which didn't endear him that much to the natives of the Aran Islands who were wanting to have a bit of sport on a Sunday. But years afterwards, J.M. Singh, as I say, the playwright that did the Playboy of the Western World, Singh had gone to W.B. Yeats to talk about his wanting to write and his need to write about the Irish culture that he felt an affinity with. And Yeats had said to him, if he was going to do that, the Singhs were Church of Ireland, they were landlord families as well. If he wanted to do that, then he needed to immerse himself in that culture. And he suggested Yeats to Singh that he go to the Aran Islands. Now, the story goes that as the boat pulled into the quay on the Aran Islands and Singh put his foot out of the boat to go on to the island, an old man was sitting at the side of the water, and he looked at him and said, I see the face of the Hamiltons. They had intermarried, and this was a generation coming down, and he recognised the same features that had been there of the man that had been there that wanted to stop the sport. And this is the lovely, you know, this is what we need to be doing with history, is joining up these links and these dots. And that's maybe some of what we'll do before we finish off tonight. So Newtownhamilton was a big part of that whole story of South Armagh, because Newtown, as I was growing up, and probably because my mother had been from Dorsey and she would have gone back to that area, Newtown was, you know, the pig mart, the trading, that was a big part of Newtownhamilton in my growing up. And you have to remember as well that, you know, because there was no industry, and we talked about that as well the first night, about the only industry in that Esbrook area heading back towards Newry. This was small agricultural farms. And the other thing was that a lot of the men worked part-time or full-time, and a lot of the farmers were the women. There's not a house in South Armagh in my growing up, and if you went into it and you took down the calendar, what would be on the back of the calendar? On the back of the calendar would have been the sow's time, when the sow was serviced and when the sow was going to pig. That's where all the things were written, on the back of the calendar. And they were all written by the women. The women remembered, they were the ones that were the ones that looked after the small animals that were around the farmyards. My mother kept hens on deep litter. Now, you have to be my age to recognise and to remember what deep litter was. But my mother reared hens in big numbers on deep litter. I was the eldest girl. This was my job. So on deep litter, the hens, you had roosts, and the hens all sat very nicely and quietly up in these roosts above the deep litter. That is until you opened the door. And the minute you opened the door, hens flew everywhere, up in the air, and feathers, and excuse the expression, but shite went everywhere. I was over home one night, not long before my mum died, and we were talking, and I said to her, geez, Mommy, I hated hens. Or if you were from Tullydonnell, where I was, there weren't hens, there were hens. I hated hens. And she said to me, she looked at me for a minute, and she said, well, you might have done Una, but they reared you. And she was right, because every Wednesday, my mother had 2 crates of eggs, 6 dozen each crate held. She had 2 crates of eggs, and Jim Toner came from Newtownhamilton and up as far as Tullydonnell with a travelling shop. And he took the 2 crates of eggs, and she bought the groceries. And that wasn't just my house, that was every house in South Armagh. That was how things worked. You know, you gather blackberries, you know, and every time the blackberries were there, the first thing we did was put water into the blackberries to make them way heavier. And the first thing Peter Lavelle did when he came to get the blackberries was team out the bucket and take the water out of them.
Well, Una, when you're talking about blackberries, a great thing just came into my head. The legendary Paddy Mallon from the Green Road. He
Yes.
would have been buying blackberries, and we would have been out gathering blackberries. There was 2 things that the people should do. Now, young ones should do. They should gather spuds and gather blackberries. But we come up with the idea we would put loads of water in them. But Paddy, being a shrewd man, he drilled holes in the bottom of the, when you put them into.
Yeah.
So all the water, all the juices dripped out of them. So then we twigged onto that. So then what we done is we put some down the bottom, and in the middle we would have threw a load of sand in to make them heavier. So Paddy came across this too. So what did Paddy do? Paddy then put the hose on them, and then he would
wash them out.
Wash them out. So you could never get the better of men like Lavelle or Mallon. But
Yeah.
yes, we gathered blackberries, and we made a few pound, and we gathered spuds as well. And that's another great story, because I think every child in the country should be made gather spuds. Absolutely.
But I mean, the other thing is, have you said that? Now, I have I have no children. My family are all grown up. But one of my girls was in primary 7, and we're talking 30 years ago. And she came home from school one evening, and she said, I have to talk to somebody who went to school in the early 1900s. I need to go and talk to my granda. So I didn't look at anything she'd written down, but we headed over to interview my father. And she started her interview, and she asked him what was his name, and he said he was Jim Murphy. And when was he born? He was born in 1916, and he started Glasgow Primary School in 1921. And then she said to him, her next question was, and what was your uniform like? And he turned around in the chair and he looked at me. And I knew why he was looking at me, because I was the generation between him and the child. It wasn't a silly question for the child to ask. She had always worn a uniform.
Yeah.
So it was a perfectly reasonable question. But he said to her, he turned back after looking at me, and I knew what I was going to hear. And he said to her, we hadn't boots on our feet, daughter, much less a uniform. We walked in our bare feet. But the reason he looked at me was I hadn't made the link. I hadn't told her what I'm telling now. I hadn't told her what the generation before me had lived through to make her life a better life.
Yeah.
And this is what I think the stories, the social history, the joining up of our dots, we need to make sure that young people know this. Is important. So look, we're going to move up. So we'll move up towards Crossmaglen, because that's the other big population area that we talked about that we really haven't done. And where Newtownhamilton had the hiring fair, Crossmaglen had the fair. Crossmaglen from Crossmaglen, Lenon's Cross. supposedly set up around a shebeen owned by Lennon. Now, in Bassett's Gate of Armagh for 1888, Owen Lennon is the proprietor of the commercial hotel. So the Lennon name was still there. You know, the names are still in Cross. Short's name was there with an establishment, McCardle's, they were still there. But the Methodist Church was there. The Methodist Church in Crossmaglen was at the top of the square where McNamee's Bakery is now. So there were different parts of stories to Cross, but always the constant in that was the buying and the selling. Not like the Pavies in Drummondtee, not going so much away out of the country to sell, but the buying and selling there on the square. It's the only part of South Armagh that has any semblance or resemblance to Bessbrook, in that there's a structure in Crossmaglen. There's a central square. And at one time, they would have said, you know, the biggest square in Ireland, because it is a lovely big square and completely built around. But the mart was in the centre of the square, right up until the early 70s, until that whole area became landscaped. And then in their wisdom, the mart was moved down behind the health centre. That's very good for health, for public health. You put the mart down behind the health centre.
Well, in relation to the fair in Crossmaglen, my grandfather and my father would have went and done deals there, bought cattle, sold cattle, and took cattle, took sheep, done all sorts of stuff there. And then obviously with the border just down the road, there would have been the odd animal would have been coming this way and going the other way.
And got dizzy in transit. It would round that
dizzy
off.
and maybe got a lack of pound too going through the customs one way or the other.
But I mean, there is. I have to say, I have, and people will use the word, I have a graph across. I really have. There is a warmth in the nature of Cross that is remarkable. South Armagh, there is in South Armagh, within the DNA of the people, there is a wit and a humour and a cynicism, a very healthy cynicism, I think, which is a good thing in all of South Armagh, but it's at a high level in Cross. It really, it's at an exceptional level. There's a lovely story for the mart. Harry Comiskey was the auctioneer. There's an old man lived in Kernally. His name was Ned McCann, and he was known locally as Ned the Bones. Now, Ned was cantankerous and awkward of himself and quick and witty. And you took Ned on at your peril. But Ned was selling a letter of suckers, letter of pigs on the square and Cross. And the auctioneer was Harry Comiskey. And Harry, like myself, was a man of small stature. But Harry could have sold snow to Eskimos. But that particular day, he couldn't shift these pigs. And he shouted down to Ned, standing on the middle of the square, there was 10 good pigs and 1 wee pig. Now, the wee pig on a letter was called a jory. I don't know if anyone has heard that expression, but around here, the small pig was the jory. And Harry shouted down to Ned, they're not selling, Ned. If you throw off the jory, they'll sell. And Ned waited till the thing quieted down. Everybody had laughed, and Ned waited till the thing quieted down, and he shouted up at Harry, you were the jory in your house, and your man kept you. Sell the pigs. But the quickness and the answer is never far in the South Armagh area. It's a terrific area. But dealing and selling and buying was how that area made its life. And that's the stories that are part of the tradition of Crossmaglen. So maybe if we get that song, Cathal.
Come all ye rambling Irishmen, and listen to me a while. And if you close attention, pay your ears, I soon beguile. No story mean of Grecian queen, no tale or Trojan lay, For a song of woe that happened so with whiskey in me tay. Diddle-dee-I-dee-I-dee-I-dee-I-dee-I-dee-I-dee-I. I was a bowl teetotaler for 3 long years or more. The neighbours all respected me, and decent clothes I wore. The family, they looked up to me till one accursed day, when like a child I was beguiled with whiskey in me tay. Diddle-dee-I-dee-I-dee-I-dee-I-dee-I-dee-I-dee-I. 'Twas at the fair at Shercock I went to sell a mare. All me friends and neighbours and the dealing men were there. I trotted her up and down the street, or for 'em to display, and I then went in with the dealing men to get a cup of tea. Diddle-dee-I-dee-I-dee-I-dee-I-dee-I-dee-I. Ah, I only took the second cup when up the ruction rose. I saw that I was put upon, I slaughtered friends and foes. The police they did surround me and hauled me up next day. When my case was read, I duly pled it was whiskey in me tay. Diddle-dee-I-dee-I-dee-I-dee-I-dee-I-dee-I. Ah, from Carrickmacross to Crossmaglen, the policeman he did vow, there are more rogues than honest men, and anyone will allow. Now it isn't rogues or honest men, the justice then did say. We deal with now a drunken row and whiskey in his tay. Diddle-dee-I-dee-I-dee-I-dee-I-dee-I-dee-I. This man, he was a sober man for 3 long years or more. The neighbours, they respected him, and decent clothes he wore. Ah, that story is an ancient one, the justice then did say. He'll pay his bill or go to jail for a whiskey in his tay. Diddle-dee-I-dee-I-dee-I-dee-I-dee-I-dee-I. So, all you bowl teetotalers, if sober you may be careful of your company, and mind what happened to me. For it wasn't the boys from Shercock or the boys from Ballabay, but the dealing men from Crossmaglen put whiskey in me tay. Diddle-dee-I-dee-I-dee-I-dee-I-dee-I-dee-I.
Una, I've been in Crossmaglen many times, and I've drunk many cups of tea in Crossmaglen, but I was never lucky enough to get whiskey put in my tea. John Campbell was absolutely brilliant in that.
But I mean, it's a wonderful tradition. I mean, you know, to have that as your history, you know, the warmth of the dealing, the sense of people coming to that area, and they came, and people still come. I mean, the fair was always, my granddad would have been fond of a wee drop of whiskey, but he always kept a canary, a singing board, always. And he went to the fair across this day, and he arrived home and he had bought a new board. Now, he had also frequented several watering holes, so he wasn't that steady on his feet when he arrived home with the board in a cage and a cover on the cage. And when the cover was taken off the next morning, he found that he had a one-legged canary. It couldn't get up on the perch. I mean, if anyone that's kept singing boards, they sing better when they're up on their perch. It couldn't get up on the perch because it only had one leg and it couldn't jump up. But he was that drunk when he bought the board that the cover never came off. And my mother kept quizzing him about, did you see this board? Oh, what did he said? Well, she said, did you not see that it only had one leg? So, you know, there were more than, there are many stories. But look, I go back to, I love Cross. I go back to that sense of, you know, it's a country town with an immense warmth and sense of itself. Mullaban beat Crossmaglen in the county championship, 95. We were in Crossmaglen. My youngest twins girls were born in 1990. We were in Crossmaglen, I think, 1997. They were about 7-year-old. But Armagh was playing an under-21 game in Cross. And we had the 5 girls with us going into it. And they got out of the back, they got out of the car, but they had Mullaban Camogie tracksuits on them. And there were 2 wee bucks standing at the side of the top of the square, where just where the police station used to be, where the barriers used to be. And everyone's got out of the car and they were all heading up the town walking. And the minute the 2 wee boys, nobody near them, they were roughly the same age as my ones, and nobody with them. And the minute they seen the Mullaban Camogie jersey, they shouted, "Up the Rangers!"
Well, Una, that
right away.
That can happen again, because I believe Crossmaglen and Mullaban play in the next round of the Armagh Championship. So there you go. So it'll be another interesting one.
But that's the history. That's the history of Crossmaglen. Now, I just wanted to say a bit about the whole area of South Armagh, because this is the last night that we're going to do this for a wee while. And the area of people and the people that I grew up with, where I suppose the generation before me were a group of people who didn't go through a standard education system. They all left school from a primary education system. But there were, as I said, on many occasions, there were people who could make up their own mind and make their own judgment and stand over their judgments. And also an area that, because I think it has always been in the DNA, because we've looked at the history that brought us to there. But certainly post 1920, and next year we're going into 2021, the 100 years of Northern Ireland. And when this area was divided, when Ireland was divided, and this area of South Armagh was here between 2 jurisdictions, and that's exactly how it came to be. And I'm not going into this in a political way. I'm going into it in a social history sense. This area of South Armagh became a piece of land between 2 jurisdictions, between a Northern Ireland jurisdiction who had no sense of what this area was about, and beside a Southern jurisdiction who let it go. So the mentality, I believe, and this is only my own thinking, the mentality of South Armagh from that time on was the mentality of an island people. Because they knew they were not going to get anything given within that northern state. They were on the absolute periphery of it anyway. And that sense of abandonment was certainly there. And they became a group of people who looked after their own. And that was very much a sense of the South Armagh that I grew up in, of knowing their own needs and being able to look after their own needs. So I think where other people saw that in a different way, I think that's how South Armagh had developed its own unique style and way of looking after itself. And that's part of joining up those histories. We talked the other night about Francis Ford, of his sense of being a good landlord in a great way. The next landlord coming back down into the Silverbridge area were the McGeow-Bonds. Silverbridge House, which is still there, private residence now, but Silverbridge House owned by the McGeow-Bonds, and they had come up from the Argery and bought 4 town lands in South Armagh. And 2 of them within the parish here of Forkhill that I'm going to talk about, which was Cashel and Anduff, the 2 that are next running into that Silverbridge area. Now, Miss McGeow-Bond in 1888, in her diary, charts for her holidays in her diary of having left Silverbridge House, 1888, which was 40 years post-famine, She left Silverbridge House and she holidayed in a villa in Switzerland. And in the next villa was the ex-Queen of Spain, Queen Isabella. And on her return journey, she shopped in Redferns in London, which was the equivalent is Harrods now in London. She shopped in Redferns for her riding habit before she returned to Silverbridge House. Now, if I look at the population figures of 1841 to 1891 for the townland of Cashel and Anduff, in Anduff, the population figures between 1841 and 1891 fell by 45% between famine, fever, and emigration. The population figures of Cashel fell by 55% with famine, fever, and emigration. So the conflict that was there was always regarded as a sectarian conflict in terms of history. These were Church of Ireland landlords, mostly Catholic tenantry. I would say to you that the conflict that was there was a conflict of social standing, of misuse of power, and of privilege, rather than anything to do with sectarianism. That wouldn't have been any different if that had been a Catholic landlord who was treating people with the same disdain. If you've lost 55% of your people and somebody's going on a holiday to Switzerland and buying a riding habit in Redferns, you can see where you have a conflict and where that conflict is going to cause trouble. So because we have not brought our social history into our reading of history, we have at times created a dynamic of how we told it, which was not right. So that's just one of the things I wanted to look at in the telling of these stories. And I think those are important. And I think now we are much more likely to look at stories when we bring them in like that. The other one is how much, I'll do the Kernally one first. we're going to have the first showing. This is something that has just been done in this last week. This is a poem that had been written by Peter Murphy. Peter Murphy was a brother of my grandfather's. He was living in London in 1939, and he wrote this poem to John Reel. And John Reel was another Kernally man who was moving from London back home. And the sense in this, of this man in London, thinking of home, walking up the road at home, talking about the houses that John Reel was going to see when he arrived, talking about the laneways, even down to talking about the bog holes, and his need and his longing and his wanting to be there where John Reel was going. Now, it was composed, as I say, in 1939. Last week, Blahi McAnna, who's going to sing this for you, put an air to this. And this is the first time that this has ever been heard tonight on Destination Uri. And if you could play it for us, Cathal, this is called
You Are Heading for Kernally, John, my soul with envy filled. For the youth that's strong within you will be bounding o'er the hills. You will stand on crag and Howard, what a sight will then unfold. With your eyes full of the world, just as the ancient poets told. Cuchulain's noble mountain will lie purple in the sun. and lesser mounts will seaward slope in arc to Dalganstown, as if to reach to Clogherhead and to guard the sleeping town, as if and with God's benching that the dapple skies look down. Wander out the winding valley round by Tavies and McShins, where homes amid the heather led away by winding lanes, down by reels and Campbell's bog holes to the savage Craigadil, where the rain gives voice to lilting from the streamlet round the mill. Oh, the hills above Carnally, they come surging through my dreams. I see Carnally's barren rocks, its rushes and its streams, and I pray that those who live there from all sorrow have relief, and I pray that those who die there will all rest in God's great peace.
Now, just before I go any further, because Campbell's bog holes was mentioned in that poem, just to say, to express our sympathy to the Campbell family who lost their mum at the end of last week. But that was Blahin McCann, and that's the first time that's a newly composed air to go to the poem that had been written almost 80 years ago. And it's back to that sense of place and that longing, and it's exactly the same. It's the ending of McCooey's poem. One thing I ask you only, one promise, O Queen Divine, and I will follow faithful, I'll follow each step of thine. If I should die in some far-off land, in my wanderings east or west, in the fragrant clay of Creggan, let my weary heart have rest. This need to be with your own people, this man in London just longing to be home, but remembering all the nooks and crannies of home. So thank you very much, Blahin, for your work.
You know, when you sit and think about that poem was written in 1939, and we have iPads and we have connections worldwide at the minute, and a click of a hand we can talk to somebody in Sydney or Hawaii or America. But in 1939, there was no way people could get back to here, and for that man to write that poem, and then for that girl to put the words to it, I think it's a delight for Destination Uri to be the first service to put that song out. And I think we're very, very privileged for that. It was absolutely lovely. And as I was looking at some of the pictures, I was going, I was there. I know that place. I know that road. And it was just gorgeous because, and you know, what was struck me about that, the tranquility of the whole thing was gorgeous. So thanks, Una, for that, and thanks to Blahin, because it was absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, and I mean, the rocks of Carnally, I mean, you know, I grew up listening to my father talk, on his love of Ternally and the rocks of Ternally, and also his statement, that he would have carried on, you'd break your back before you'd break your fast, because that's what it is, absolute and total rock that people were living on. But it's such a beautiful, beautiful area. Just to sort of bring the context of South Armagh then into a wider context of Ireland, because the first night we looked at Derrymore House and the fact that the draft acts of treaty were signed in Derrymore House, and that on the 1st of January 1801 the Act of Union became part of our major history. So from that stage on, all of the MPs elected went to the Mother Parliament of Westminster. And what that did, so we in South Armagh, with Corrie's House and Corrie Chancellor of the Exchequer, we were part of that piece of history. But the next piece of history and what that Act of Union did, so Dublin was the second city of the British Empire. Dublin was the society city. The parliamentarians sat in the old Parliament in Dublin. The great balls happened in Dublin. People had their big houses. The beautiful Georgian houses that fronted onto the streets were part of that whole setup for these people going to Dublin for the society ball. But when the Act of Union happened, that stopped to some extent, because they were no longer coming to Dublin, they were going to Westminster. And gradually that use diminished. And then your next big piece of history, as we've just talked about with the townlands of Cashel and Anduff, was the Gorta Mór, was the big famine. And people died on the side of the road. People left if they could afford it, as we talked about in the story of the Hannah. And people flocked from rural areas into urban areas in search of anything that would save their lives. So suddenly you had this mass of hungry, dying people on the streets in Dublin, and no society people coming. And the people who had money began to move out, and they moved to the suburbs, and they built newer houses where they didn't have to see this in the middle of the city. And developers are not a modern phenomenon. The developers moved into those big Georgian houses. They split them up. And that piece of history created the tenements that are the history of Dublin in the 1900s, the tenement dwellings. There was a lovely programme done on RTE maybe most of 10 years ago, and they looked at Henrietta Street during the 1911 census. And in one house of Henrietta Street, there were 87 people living in that house. Families in tenement rooms. 2 families in some rooms, but that Act of Union that we were part of, that was part of our history, and that house is still here in South Armagh, and the knock-on effect and the joining up of the dots. And this is what we need to be doing. We need to be looking at our history in that wide context of how all of it tells a story and how that story moves on. So I want to show one last video. And again, this is a completely new piece of work, because one of the things that you've said, Damien, every night, I think, from we started, was, why is there not more being done about South Armagh? So this video, I would talk history till I was blue in the face. I've talked history from we started. But one of the things I've said as we've gone along is the absolute and total physical beauty of South Armagh. If I took all of the history away from it, you could still sell South Armagh like Harry Comiskey Snow to the Eskimos just by looking at it. It is the most beautiful place in the world. It has to be. So this is a video that was shot on Saturday, filmed on Saturday, with an iPad and a car, driving around No climbing involved. This video has been filmed from roadside. So from the roads of South Armagh, this is what you can see. It has been, there's the background music has been composed and played by Eddie McMurhu, my nephew. The 5 tunes he's featured are on Fair Cune, Dowson and Terry, Chow are on Svellig, The Ivy House, and Out on the Edge. My apologies, E, if I've spelled some of this or said some of that wrong. But just sit back and look at this, and this is what South Armagh looks like. Bawailan Forturiv Guji Yanan Wahahas. Welcome to South Armagh, the magical, mythical valleys and hills of Gullion. It carries a heritage. Mountains give one a certain standard which governs the whole outlook. They take a grip on the heart as one grows, and always leave one with what the people say, a gra for it forever. There is no doubt that this is a special place. Surrounded by the presence of Slieveguillion, nurtured by the legend and stories, secure in a vibrant cultural identity which defines our sense of place, a heritage of Irish chieftains, Gaelic bards, music, poetry and stories. Dome of Slieveguillion and of your brood, my soul is a part in your rock heather heart, slave to your mood. Mystical beauty breathes on your brow, sun-setting beams lull me to dreams, far from my plough. Wild inspiration flees unexpressed, through tinted suntrap, ancient mist wool cap, storing my breast. Mountain of mystery, of Finn the brave, of Saint Scollard Gael, of legend and tale, I am your slave. Peace hushed the valley into silence, and it's a beauty of the kind that inspires the soul. Here, where there is no past or future time, where the extremities of man's life run together in one line to disappear in the outstretched arms of its 60 million years. Welcome to my heart's home, South Armagh.
Una,
Now, well,
I was looking at some of them roads there, and I was going, I was there the other day. I was there the other day. I was there the other day. It was a lovely.
well,
it was a
well,
lovely.
well, that's the first time. That's a new piece just for Destination Uri tonight. But there's two things. The first thing is, you know, wouldn't it make you proud to be from South Armagh? That's first of all. And the second thing is what you have said. How can we have a tourist board that doesn't recognise what that is? You know, because when you, like, that's outstanding. It's absolutely outstanding. In scenery, without even looking at the history, but just visually to look at it. I mean, it would lift your heart.
Look, there's no doubt there's people coming in from Kent, coming in from America, coming in from all over the place, putting comments up. Somebody came in there and said their grandfather, the father, planted Slievegullin in the 1940s. Somebody's family came from Shanroe in the 1800s, or 1880s. But you know, I'm proud to be from South Armagh. When I go anywhere, I don't say I'm from Uri. I say I'm from Camla in South Armagh. And you come from Carnally, and you're saying you come from Carnally in South Armagh. And there's lads from Camla and there's girls from Camla who've been in Australia and been in New Zealand, and they ask them where they're from. And every one of them says, we're from South Armagh. We're from South Armagh. We're not from Armagh, we're from South Armagh. And, you know, it's funny, when you think about this, not alone have we got a lovely lake, we've got the longest railway tunnel in Ireland, in South Armagh, and we've also got the longest submerged tunnel in South Armagh at the end of Camla Lake. Not a lot of people know that. And
that's common.
I was one of the very, very few people, Una, that stood at the face of that tunnel before it was closed on an Easter Sunday, way back in the mid-70s. and that's another story that I can tell you about. But I was at the face of that, and the tunnel, it went up like this, and then it went down like that, away down into Sleep Gullion. So not alone have I stood on the top of it, I've stood in the heart of it, and my heart, you're tugging at my heart, my heartstrings there tonight, Una. I have to say it was lovely, and we have to say on Destination U, we're very proud that tonight we had 2 exclusives. We had the poem and we had that video with the lovely music, and we have to thank you for that. I'm going to let you finish this this whole series here, Una, with your last words, because from everybody in Destination U and from everybody who's been watching, we'd like to thank you, because you can see that you're so proud of where you come from, and the way you tell the story is fantastic, and I know that people have enjoyed it. But we haven't heard the end of Una Walsh on Destination U, that's for sure, because we'll be coming back, Una, looking for more. But I'm going to give you, Una, you're going to finish the show with your last words, so it's up to you.
Okay. Well, first of all, could I thank E for his work with the music, and to take it back to his English name just for now. But he's the youngest QE of the QE Moors. We, as the Murphys, are the QE Moors. So E is our youngest Q, and they've kept the name going, which is wonderful as well. Look, I'd like to thank Damien and Cahill from Destination Uri for giving me the opportunity. It's been 7 weeks. I've enjoyed every minute of it because I love it. I do love it. I love looking at South Armagh. I love breaking down people's perceptions of what is history and what the area was like. I love looking at the whole social context of it. I love stories. I do. And I wouldn't in any way describe myself as a shannicky, but I love carrying those stories on. I was thinking of my mum today because I knew I was going to say some of the stuff that she did. And I remember standing in the street, there were 2 boys older than me in my house, and everywhere the boys went, I wanted to go. I wanted wherever they were getting to, I wanted to get to. And I remember them standing one day, and I'm going to leave you with this one. I'll thank Destination Uri very much, Cahill, before I tell this, because when I tell this, you probably need to shut down. The 2 boys were standing holding a bag, and the bag was moving. And I said, where are they going? And Mommy said they were going down to Minnie McCabe's. And I said, can I go? No, you definitely can't go. Well, why can I not go? It's not fair because girls can't go. Why can the boys go if I can't go? But my mother's sensibilities were that attuned, that she wasn't having her daughter going down because they were leaving with a turkey hen. She kept a turkey hen, and the turkey hen was going down to be tramped. Good night. Thank you.